From national protests over fuel subsidies to Boko Haram attacks, an embattled Nigerian leader faces the most serious challenge of his presidency. Can Africa's most populous country navigate multiple minefields, or is Nigeria sliding into chaos? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sami Zaidan. Well, Nigerian trade unions held a second day of strikes. Their grievance? The withdrawal of a fuel subsidy that has more than doubled prices. Well, tensions on the streets of the northern Nigerian city of Kano were running high on Monday. At least 3 people were killed. But the Nigerian government remains defiant, saying it can save billions of dollars in public funds by ending the subsidies now. Harun Mutasa has more for us.
Nigerians take to the street angry at a recent government decision to remove fuel subsidies. The country produces more than 2 million barrels of crude oil a day, but imports roughly 70% of its gasoline from abroad because its oil refineries aren't working. Many here see the subsidy as the only benefit of living in an oil-producing country.
We voted them. At least they told us to vote them. We believed in them and we took them there. And this is what we're getting. It's sad. It's really sad.
Since subsidies were removed, some say they are struggling.
The price of bread has doubled. The price of fuel in some places has even tripled. Labour unions want the Nigerian government to find other ways to raise money, and they want fuel subsidies brought back.
In the capital, Abuja, things were relatively peaceful. But in the commercial hub of Lagos, protesters clashed with police. In Kano State, in the north of the country, police fired on people trying to enter a government building. A curfew has been imposed there. Labour unions hope a prolonged general strike will disrupt services and force officials to give in.
If it's not enough, we'll keep going, because we have several strategies that we're also going to deploy. So for now, at least for now, they still have power on. It's possible power may go in another 2 or 3 days if nothing happens. Water may also dry up. So there are other means that we can also deploy.
But President Goodluck Jonathan's administration isn't showing signs of backing down. It says Treasury could save up to $6 billion in 2012, telling Nigerians the money saved will be spent on infrastructure development and services for the poor. But these protesters don't agree.
Let them fight corruption and every other thing will work. That's all we ask for. We don't ask for any other thing. The country is a big mess.
It couldn't come at a worse time for the government. The country is still reeling from the wave of attacks on Christians by the radical Islamic group Boko Haram. And now this general strike threatens to cripple the economy and bring Nigeria to a standstill. Harun Mutasa, Al Jazeera, Abuja.
Well, is Nigeria then sliding further and deeper into chaos? That's a question we're going to try and pose to our guests. Let's bring them in now then. In London, we have Garba Sani. He's a Nigerian political analyst and a member of the Nigerian Muslim Forum. Also in London, Michael Amoah, an associate of LSE Ideas and author of Nationalism, Globalization and Africa. And joining us via broadband from Lagos, Katie Mark, a journalist and documentary filmmaker. Well, a very warm welcome to all of you. If I could start actually with Katie, could we say this is perhaps the most serious challenge facing the president, perhaps even facing the country's history?
At the moment, people think the country's in crisis. And I was out actually yesterday in the strikes, and people just said that he needs to deal with this problem or he needs to go. I mean, we have Boko Haram, which the president himself has said is the most serious threat that's faced the country. So he said it's even more serious than the Biafran civil war in 1960. And the fuel crisis has really the removal of the fuel subsidy has united people because it's something that affects pretty much everyone in the country. And so that has also united people, and people are united in their anger against the removal of the fuel subsidy. So,
but even if it's united people, I mean, I guess the question on my mind is, it seems so far the strike hasn't impacted crude oil exports. As some are saying, as long as that remains the case, the government can kind of simply sit it out. Is that how you see things developing here?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, it's, you know, the government has said they will not back down. Of course, this is necessary. But the protesters, and I've been speaking to a lot of them, some of the organisers, they're also saying they will not back down. They say that they will keep going for however long they need to keep going, and it will actually start to affect normal people. Like we already, it's hard. All the shops are closed. We can't get petrol. We can't go out shopping. So I don't know who. It depends who will back down first. But I think the government. I mean, last time there were strikes in 2003, it lasted 7 days before the government gave in. So I think even if it doesn't affect oil and fuel imports, they might still give in because it's affecting the economy.
All right, let's go to Michael then. Michael, looking at some of the arguments perhaps which the government is presenting, what would you make of the argument that without ending fuel subsidies, really the government will be forced to borrow even more money, pushing national debt to dangerously high levels?
In practical terms, I mean, basically what the government is saying is once they've cut down on the subsidies, they want to transfer the money gained into the production of local oil refineries. And in practical terms, we're talking about at the very least 3 years before these refineries will materialize. So it's not a quick fix solution.
Is that necessarily a bad thing, though?
This is
sometimes, isn't it better to go for the long-term solution if it's the right one rather than a quick fix one?
It's not necessarily a bad thing. The problem here is that the timing is wrong, and also the actual social cost of the whole program is also wrong. I mean, we've got in place a finance minister who is a former vice president of the World Bank, who is actually driving forward this particular policy along the lines of, you know, the OD's structural adjustment program, which didn't quite take into consideration how it affects the rest of the society. So the actual, you know, what's happening on the ground is that fuel cost is going to go up by 134%. At the same time as the other policy of rolling out the buses to cut down on fares is all too sudden, which is not going to work immediately. So there are concerns on the ground everywhere as to whether this policy is realistic at this current moment in time.
All right, that perhaps it isn't all that well thought out. Let's bring in Garba, if we can, into the discussion here. And looking at the scenes that we're seeing on the streets, when the government says, you know, we'll end subsidies, but the money we'll get from that, we'll put it into other projects, life will get better. It seems like Nigerians simply don't believe that. They don't trust their politicians.
Absolutely, absolutely. There is a huge trust deficit between the general public and the government. And this is not coincidence. It has been going on for quite a while. And the fact that the government is being seen to be a kind of a corrupt government, and the huge corruption is what is driving this. And therefore, the perception of the people is that if the government can actually tackle the huge issue of corruption, then the issue of oil subsidy will simply go away. Because what the government is saying is there is a cartel that is really sipping out this 1.3 billion naira away from the economy, and that the government is not strong enough to tackle this cartel and deal with the cartel. Instead, the government rather have to get the money from the ordinary people who have been suffering for quite a long time and who see this, actually, the oil subsidy, as the probably only benefit or dividend, if you may say, of their leadership. And yet, the government is bringing all sorts of explanations, like providing some buses, less than 2,000, for the whole nation, where Lagos has got over 2,000 already, and also subsidizing, or rather increasing the salary of government workers. All this is not addressing the issue. The ordinary person on the street.
But hang on here. This is what the government is arguing, though, isn't it? It's saying that the best way to deal with that cartel is to end the whole subsidy program. Bring in more investment, create more refineries, refine more oil, have more of it available, and prices will go back down for the average consumer. May not be the quickest solution, but the government seems to think it's the best one.
Yeah, it's quite attractive to put it that way, and that is the line of the government. But the reality is we have we have had all the chances of really building some serious functioning, properly functioning refineries in the country. And the government has not taken the chance to do that. And for the government to introduce such a measure, and that is so drastic and so hugely disadvantageous to the people, it should have made the refineries functioning. And once we have a fully functioning refineries, the subsidy, in fact, the oil importation will not be an issue, because what we are doing is importing oil, and that's where the issue of subsidy is. Let's subsidize internal production and therefore cut out the cartel as well as supply oil to the ordinary person on the street.
All right, if we go back to Katie, is there still time for the government to sort of get this program right? If it was to suspend the subsidy program for a little while, engage in some kind of public debate and discussion with the stakeholders, present a real thought-out plan for how the revenues are going to be used, and allow people to adjust gradually rather than sort of slashing all subsidies in one go? Is it too late for that sort of thinking now?
No, I think that's exactly what people want. I mean, speaking to a lot of the protesters and a lot of union leaders, they're saying that what they want is consultation. They say they've never been consulted. They say the subsidy was removed in just very suddenly in one go. I mean, in other countries, we've had removal of subsidies, like in Ghana, and it's been gradual. But they're saying, why couldn't this have been gradual? And a lot of people are saying, you know, if we sort out corruption first, sort out all these other issues, and then remove the subsidies, I think it will be more accepted, because I don't think people are necessarily against the actual removal of the subsidies. I mean, I think some people understand that it's necessary, that it's a big part of the budget and the government can't afford to keep spending it. But I think the problem is the way that the president has gone about it. That's what I'm hearing, that they say that it just hasn't, they feel like they've just been left, like they voted this president in and they've been let down again, basically. And I think if the government were to engage in some sort of conversation with the people and try and find a way to do this where people aren't hit so hard. I mean, to have a 100% rise in prices in a day, people can't afford that. So that, you know, that is just not sustainable, because
right.
with the amount of poverty in the country, they just can't live with those prices.
That's definitely a sentiment we're hearing, aren't we, on the streets. Michael, trying to put it perhaps in a bigger picture here, what's at stake right now? It's not just the subsidy program in this standoff between the government and unions, is it? It's the whole question of reform, the government's reform program, and where that will lead to.
Yes, indeed. The government reform program is actually at stake. It's quite obvious that the president is weak. And also there are some technocratic decisions being made without consideration to actually how this pans out on the ground. But more particularly, it's about the rollout of government policy, the bad timing of it, and exactly how it's been thought out to manifest. If we, for example, look at the idea of rolling out 1,000 buses in a day to try and cut down on transport fares in order to, just before you introduce the subsidies. I mean, already the traffic in most of the major cities where these buses are going to be rolled out is quite heavy enough on bad roads. There are no mandatory bus routes and there is no congestion charge. So you're basically just asking for trouble to be introducing all these 1,000 buses in a day ahead of the fuel cut subsidies. So the whole reform program actually needs to be revised on the basis of the implementation on the ground.
And if they can't get this right, one wonders how messy the battle is going to get, the political battle, when it gets to things like reforming the Constitution and so forth. But, you know, it's not just protests over the fuel subsidies, which is facing the Nigerian government and president right now. As we saw earlier in that report, the other threat, Boko Haram, the Islamist group responsible for a wave of attacks on Christians in recent weeks. Well, it's a threat the Nigerian government is all too aware of. Nigerian President Goodluck Jonathan has said, the situation we have on our hands is even worse than the civil war we fought. During the civil war, we knew and we could even predict where the enemy was coming from. But the challenge we have today is more complicated. He went on to say some continue to dip their hands and eat with you, and you won't even know the person who will point a gun at you or plant a bomb behind your house. So with that in mind, let's talk a little bit with our guests about the Boko Haram situation, the other big front facing the government. And if I could take the discussion perhaps to Garba now in London, whether we're talking about Boko Haram, whether we're talking about national strikes and fuel subsidies or the Niger Delta violence, could you say that perhaps they're all just symptoms of one problem, that there simply is no confidence in the ability of the state to govern?
That certainly is an indication of failure of leadership, and failure of leadership that we have been suffering in the country for quite a while. And this actually government has demonstrated more or less, and in some quarters is being looked at as the worst performance as far as the failure of leadership is concerned. And the issue of fuel subsidy it comes at a time when there has been quite attention in the country on a number of issues, but more particularly the security situation in the country. And therefore, there was also the political issue. We only a few months ago, I would say, went through an election that had actually experienced some violence afterwards. And then the Boko Haram situation, therefore the security tension in the country. And this oil subsidy comes as a uniting factor across the nation. This cuts across north, south, and the political divide, the tribal divide, and the religious divide. And therefore, we unite the people. And therefore, the anger is not just simply on the fuel subsidy. The fuel subsidy on its own is enough to have such a anger, but then coupled with the Boko Haram situation and the security situation, it becomes even a lot more than what the government can hold. And therefore, the weakness of the government is apparent.
That the only thing that seems to be uniting people right now is anger and rebellion against authorities. If we could go to Katie, perhaps, on that thought, has the process of state dissolution already begun when you look at some of the trends, like Nigerians abandoning the hinterland, they're forming vigilantes, they're saying we'll protect ourselves, communities arming themselves?
Well, that I was actually speaking to an analyst, and he actually said this is a very similar situation to what happened before the Biafran War. We saw, sporadic violence. We saw a loss of confidence in the government. We saw no repercussions for corruption among politicians. So the whole kind of atmosphere feels like it's really leading up to something could be called a crisis. And also people are saying things like, we subsidize our own electricity by having generators, because we don't have, the electricity does fail here quite a lot. People have private security in their houses, on their gates, because, the police aren't protecting their property. So a lot of the institutions of state that the government should be providing for people, people are providing for themselves.
Well, let's look at some of the words you're using there now. We're talking about crisis, war, Biafra war, civil war. If we can go to Michael with that in mind, is this what Boko Haram is trying to do? To spark tension between Muslims and Christians, to spark a war that would break up the country and they get a Muslim republic in the north? Is that their thinking, and is it working?
Well, I mean, the lead up to the Biafran war is similar scenario to what's happening at the moment. I mean, this basically may play into the hands of Boko Haram, although Boko Haram did not plan the fuel subsidies or these particular strikes. In actual fact, some people have stayed away from the strikes for fear that Boko Haram may also bomb them. So in a sense, that has balanced each other in the end. However, we just need to bear in mind that the phenomenon of Boko Haram, which is really some demonic entity to be brought under subjection, is different from the Occupy Nigeria strikes in response to the fuel subsidies. Whatever the case may be, the government has a job on its hands to sort of override all of this. What puzzles people, though, is that Nigeria is actually not at war with any other country. So the whole military apparatus is available to deal with Boko Haram, and yet the state has not been able to deal with Boko Haram. So citizens really are looking for leadership to deal with this thing, which at the moment seems very weak.
All right, let's go to Garba while we're talking about Boko Haram. Perhaps we should take a step back and ask Who are they? What do they want? Well, what we hear is that they want some kind of state in the north. Is that their ultimate goal?
Who are they? What do they want? Who are they? Really, that's a question that no one can actually specifically answer, not even the security authorities or the government itself, because this is a local uprising that has generated into a national and international issue. And then with the utterance and the statement by the president of the country just a couple of days ago that Boko Haram operatives are in his government, in the legislature, in the judiciary, which therefore brings the question to, then who are they? Who are really these people? If he is saying that in his own cabinet there are Boko Haram operatives, in the security system there are, in the judiciary, in the legislature, then we say, who are the suspects? Then all Muslims in his cabinet are suspects. All Muslims in these institutions are suspects. The citizen number 2, vice president, is a suspect. In his cabinet are suspect. The judicial system, the highest judicial authority, the person presiding over the judiciary is a suspect, and so as the legislatures. As such, the definition of Boko Haram now has taken a different dimension altogether. As such, if we were to go back to what we used to call Boko Haram, which was not too long ago, from Borno, from Maiduguri, where these operations started, their demands were simple because there was provocation on the part of the government in terms of killing its leaders and some people. And this provocation kind of, there was a retaliation. So these people demanded justice. They started by asking fair trial of those responsible for killing their leader. And only today or yesterday, the Borno state government has actually compensated 100 million naira compensation for the killing of the father-in-law of the leader, who is
right.
Baba Fugu.
But how representative is this group of Muslims in Nigeria in general? I mean, it's hard to think that most Muslims in Nigeria want to split the country when most of the oil wealth is in the predominantly Christian and animist south. Yeah, but the split, when we talk of splitting the country into two, north-south, is not as simple as that. And this is an issue that has been going on for quite a long time, more because of the injustice, the social injustice that's going on by the leadership, but more so because the political leadership for years and on have been divisive in terms of their policy, and therefore they created this division between north and south, and therefore the perception of an ordinary northerner, ordinary southerner is that if we divide the nation into these two halves, we will be better off, and that has been advocated for quite a long time. So really, that is now just being played out because an opportunity has arisen that people are disenchanted not only with the leadership of the country, but also with the seemingly north-south attack on Christians by a Muslim body, a body that has not carried the other Muslims with them. All right, let's quickly try and bring a comment from Katie here. Is it a little bit surprising to you, does it catch your attention, that it seems that the one thing that both sides, whether it's Boko Haram or the government, or if perhaps even the protesters seem to all agree on, is that the authorities can't be trusted? I mean, even you've got the president now saying some of those in power may be Boko Haram too.
I mean, I don't think it's really surprising because corruption is a big problem in Nigeria, and it's always been a big problem. And I mean, the president knows this. The president has said when he came into power that removing corruption is going to be one of his main priorities. So I think this distrust of the authorities is quite endemic. I think it's been before Boko Haram, before the fuel subsidies. I think that distrust was always there. And I just want to say one thing about the point of Boko Haram. How widespread is it? He asked the other guest. I really don't. Boko Haram are an extremist group, and I think they represent a minority of people, because it's not just that they want the split, it's that they want Sharia law. So even if people think, yeah, they want a North Nigeria, a South Nigeria to be independent, not all Muslims want to have that Sharia law. I think it is not, I mean, it's spread, the attacks are spreading, the attacks are becoming more ferocious, but I don't think they are, are really
they represent
a majority view.
All right, everyone, it's been great talking to you, but we are going to have to leave it there. Let's thank all of our guests in London, Garba Sani, Katie Mark in Lagos, also in London, Michael Amoah. And thank you very much for joining us on this edition of Inside Story. As always, if you want to send us your feedback, just email us your thoughts at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.